record show that a quorum of board members is present and that this meeting has been duly called and that its notice has been posted in accordance with Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code Chapter 551. The first item on our agenda this afternoon is closed session. And so at 4:31, we will go into closed session as authorized by the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code 551.001 concerning purposes permitted by the Act, including 551.071 consultation with attorney, 551.072 deliberation regarding real property, 551.074 deliberate the appointment, employment, evaluation, reassignments, duties, discipline, or dismissal of a public employee, or to hear a complaint or charge against an employee. 5:02, and we'll go back into open session. The next item is community input, and we do not have any community input today, so we'll move on to the next item. Consent agenda, consider approval of monthly human resources board report. Entertain a motion for that.
Mr. President,
Mr. Cottrell.
I move that we approve the recommendation of the superintendent to approve the human resources report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cottrell. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, we'll take a vote. All those in favor? It's unanimous. Okay, thank you. Next item is item A, discuss 2023-2024 budget update.
Okay, yes, and Ms. Benzai is here, and I'm going to pass her the clicker. And she is going to provide a budget overview, which is consistent with previous presentations, along with additional information to support decisions the board will be making at the July board meeting. And we received a legislative update today that she will briefly touch on also.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. Today we're going to go through just a preliminary budget update. We'll then look at our a compensation update as well afterwards. Briefly, I wanted to talk a little bit about the budget timeline. It's that time of year where things start moving really fast budget-wise, and so this is just a quick look at the things that we have coming up. Of course, tonight we're discussing the budget and compensation plan. We're hoping that the board we can have a proposal for the board to approve a compensation plan at the July board meeting. At that July board meeting, we'll also be setting a date to schedule a public hearing to discuss the budget and tax rate. July 25th will be the day that we receive our certified tax values from both of our appraisal districts, which is an important time point because there's so many calculations that are needed once we receive those. And then we will be publishing a notice of the public meeting to discuss the budget and tax rate in early August after we go through our tax rate calculations. TEA will send us approval of our maximum compressed tax rate in early August as well. And then what we are looking at is an August 21st board meeting. This is the final day that the board can order a tax rate election for November. And so before you can order a tax rate election, you have to have a budget hearing, you have to adopt your budget, you have to adopt your tax rate, and then you can order a tax rate election. So this, the calendar is very well laid out by the state on certain days and timelines that we need to abide by. So those are some of the main timelines that we have coming up. As I go into every budget presentation, I always like to bring up the budget goal provided by the board to further the CCISD's mission and strategic plan with financial integrity, maximizing benefits from available resources. Very quickly, our budget priorities are to balance the budget, funds for improved student achievement, competitive salaries, stipends, and benefits, fund our Safe and Secure program, increase our state revenue through promoting student attendance and leveraging excess reserves and other funds. I won't go through all of our budget assumptions and risk that we have, but I do want to highlight a few of them because I think that as we go through this presentation tonight, these are the main things I'd like you to keep on your mind is in looking at our risk. Probably the biggest risk that we have right now is our second risk up here, failure of our voter approval tax rate election in November. That is will generate significant additional funds, including those state enrichment funds. And so that's this budget that you'll look at tonight is inclusive of that revenue source. Over on assumptions, we are looking to try to balance our budget. And this budget you'll see tonight includes all of the golden pennies, the 5 that the board can approve and the 3 that voters will approve. And then finally, we are trying to protect our fund balance, keep not require any transfers from capital and contingency as we've had to do over the past 2 years, and to maintain an adequate general fund balance. Some of the factors, really these are if I had to name them, these are the 6 factors that really influence the budget this year. Of course, our student enrollment and attendance. We're trying to get a handle on what that's going to do and the projections for that, making sure that they're accurate and realistic. The impact that inflation has had on our cost. The legislation this year, or the lack of legislation, the uncertainty has been a major challenge this year. Our increase in property values, we've had significant value growth, and you'll see that in a few slides down. The impact of ESSER funding, we're going on the final year next year of ESSER funds, and then we will be starting to see expenditures return back to the general fund. So that plays a big impact on our multi-year forecast. And then finally, the strategic budget sprint team, the input that they had, and some of the decisions that are going into this budget, and also utilizing that sprint team in the future for making budgetary decisions. So some of the highlights of this budget, we've spoken before. We're assuming an enrollment loss of 300 students. We're anticipating attendance rate at what we had last year. We're including all those golden pennies in this budget. We're including the local homestead exemption. One of the good things that we've have been able to see is an increase in our interest revenue due to those higher interest rates. So that's been a plus for this on the revenue side for this budget. Maintaining our general fund balance, which our current board policy calls for at least 2 months of expenditures in fund balance. Not utilizing the capital and contingency. We also have staffing reductions included, again, in this year's budget, and of course increases for fuel, property and casualty, and other expenses due to inflation. A quick reminder, funding of school districts as property taxes go up, state aid goes down. The opposite also happens as well. So we're hearing a lot about legislation and putting more money into property tax relief. It really it doesn't make the pot any bigger for us. It just simply changes the mix of revenue sources in our available funds. Looking over at property taxes and state aid, we know that those are the main sources of revenue in our general fund, and I won't go over all of these items, but I did want to speak a little bit about the state aid. The basic allotment, again, it's $6,160. There was no increase in that as a result of legislation this past year, and so that has had a significant impact on our budget. So some latest news we have, this actually came out about a week and a half ago when the governor called the second special session. We saw, actually I made this slide last week, and so there's some update as of today, but I'll go through what it was looking like as of last week. So the House was looking at compressing that tax rate by 16 cents. On the Senate side, they were looking at compressing it by 10 cents. And also, and I put in green, the increasing that homestead exemption, the state homestead exemption, from $40,000 to $100,000. In red, I have something very important, which is one thing that we did see in the Senate side was they were included prohibiting a school district that had an optional homestead exemption in tax year 2022. And as you know, we have a 5% homestead exemption. It would prevent them from repealing or reducing the optional homestead exemption until 2028. So that's a significant piece of that legislation. It would include hold harmless provisions, which is important because if you look at on our INS side, if they do, as they increase that homestead exemption, it means lost revenue for us, and we have debt that we're paying on previous bond issues, so they will come in and hold us harmless on that previous debt that we had and provide additional state. There was a Senate joint resolution to provide school districts with funding for the next 2 years for a supplemental payment to each full-time classroom teacher, and that's was for $2,000 for districts such as ours over 20,000 students. So the update that we received today was that the lieutenant governor and the speaker did come to an agreement on a property tax deal. I've seen the legislation, but I saw it about 30 minutes before I came into this meeting, so it's hard to diagnose what it says that quickly, but it did have an increase in the homestead exemption to $100,000, so that did go through, and it looks like there's an additional 10.7 cents of tax rate compression included in there. I don't know where, I didn't see anything about prohibiting school districts from eliminating or reducing that optional homestead exemption. But like I said, I just saw it hot off the press, so I'm not sure where that stands. And I believe they mentioned they should have something finalized by the end of this week. So, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the impact of that homestead exemption on our taxpayers. So I'm giving you an example of a taxpayer with a home taxable value of $300,000. That $40,000 current homestead exemption that the state provides about $446 in property tax savings each year for our homeowners on a $300,000 home. If we look at the state mandated homestead exemption that they are proposing with a $100,000 taxable value reduction, then that is a decrease of about $1,114 in property taxes. So it gives those taxpayers about $668 in annual tax savings due to that bump in the homestead exemption. Bringing up our the optional homestead exemption that CCISD provides, that is a reduction of about $15,000 or $15,000 in taxable values, and it provides a decrease of about $167 in annual property taxes. I want to give just a reminder to the board that the cost of that homestead exemption that reduces our taxable values in the district by about $861 million, and it's about $10.2 million in property taxes that we forego each year to be able to provide this optional homestead exemption. About $8 million of that is on the general, the maintenance and operations side. The remaining is on the INS side. So we're watching this legislation very carefully to see if there is any sort of prohibition, because that is an option for additional revenue if the board were to choose to do that. I believe a decision has to be made on that before, we think it's the end of July every year. Something's saying maybe June, but we think it's the end of June. Okay, the end of June. So we wouldn't be able to do that, of course, for this year, but that is something that we will watch for the following year. Okay, so a look at our taxable property values from Galveston, Central Appraisal District, and Harris County over the past 6 years. You can see really on the right-hand column the increase in our property values each year, and I'm amazed. Tax year 23, which is what or tax year 2022, which is what we're in, our values have gone up about 12.78%. They have not. There's protests, and they're going to come down a little bit from that. I'm surprised they haven't come down more than that, but they're holding pretty steady. We did receive preliminary values from the appraisal districts in May, and that again, we're seeing an increase of about 12.9%. So we'll get those certified values on July 25th from the appraisal districts and be able to start doing final calculations for our tax rate. A look at our tax rate. you can see, again, the history of what our tax rate has done. When the preliminary calculations that I have on the M&O side, we do have some required compression this year that was built into current law. So the number you're seeing here, and I was estimating, it's all driven by what our property value growth is going to be. And so I think I utilized an 8% property value growth, and that would compress our tax rate to the point where if we did add on the additional cents onto our tax rate, as we're going to voters to do, they would see basically a tax rate that doesn't change from last year. With what the state's done, that tax rate will go down further. So there will, I feel comfortable to say with, we may have seen, if there was no legislation passed, we might have seen more compression, which would have reduced that M&O tax rate. And we may, and with the 10-cent additional compression, I know that it will go down more. So in the next few weeks, we'll be able to see the real impact that that's had.
Real fast on that slide, you say on there that the state aid is based on current year state comptroller's property values. So I actually never knew this before. I assumed that we were sending our property values to TEA, and then TEA was deciding how much state aid we're given based on our local appraisal district. So is it the state appraisal system that determines how much we get, or is it the local appraisals?
So there's a property value study done every year by the comptroller's office. We send off data, they do a study, and they assign a value to us. And so it's a whole separate value from what our actual values are. They should, in theory, be equal, but they're not. But that value that the comptroller determines for the school district, there's that is what determines the offset for our Tier 1 revenue in the state aid. It's based on, not on GCAD or HCAD's values, it's based on the state's determination of that value. And that's why sometimes, a lot of times, you'll see school districts protesting to the state those values because they may set them too high. And we just did a preliminary protest on our last year's values, and they brought those values down. So that benefited us because we received more in state revenue.
Right. And I know we've done those audits in the past also. Is there much of a mismatch? Do they separate it out by Harris County and Galveston County? Like the state also?
They combine them. They do. They are separate, but they'll totally.
Well, yeah, obviously for the whole district. But is there a mismatch on one side or the other that is maybe, I don't know, either causing a problem for us or anything like that?
The reason that I believe this year, the reason that we were able to get lower values approved was due to some issues in that the auditor, the property tax attorney that we use, identified on the Harris County, I believe it was Harris County side. And so there are modifications to that. I don't know that it's a very complex, the way they do the property value study. I think one thing is for us is just to be sure that we have our attorneys look at that every year and be able to do those studies and make sure there's nothing off. But there's always, it's never going to equate to the actual, especially our HCAD and GCAD values are changing every day because of lawsuits and protests, and it can go on for years, but that you don't see that state property value changing every time it's set. And then unless there's a significant issue that can be discovered or researched or found and handled through an audit, it stays in place.
Okay. Thanks.
The other thing too, though, that I did want to mention is that they do not recognize the optional homestead exemption for that. So when we're funded, we're not funded. They assume we don't provide an optional homestead exemption. So it's a loss of revenue that we don't get any state credit for through that. As far as student enrollment goes, we do have, we ended the year, well, this slide actually represents our snapshot that we do for PEAMS every year, which is in the fall. It reflects a 241 student decline this year, a 0.59% decline in enrollment. The enrollment projected for next year is based on a 300 student loss, which is what our demographers have estimated. And looking over at attendance, we're showing that roughly 300 student loss there for next year, and utilizing that same attendance rate. Really hoping that attendance rate pops up just naturally next year. We did see some, at the end of this past school year, some stabilization in it that we're excited to see. So we'll be watching that closely. And just a brief summary of our general fund revenues. What I've done here is just reflecting the including the total of 8 golden pennies. So that's assuming the board will approve that 5th golden penny and voters will approve the other 3 golden pennies. So these revenue estimates that I'm showing you tonight include that source of revenue. And then on the expenditure side, I have our expenditure changes in here. We're still making a few modifications, but I do not have any compensation increases in here at this point. So I wanted to kind of show you what the picture looks like without any compensation changes, and then we can go from there. A few of the changes, I try to outline some of the significant changes that we've had in our budget expenditures from one year to the other. Of course, one of the major items is just that one-time calendar adjustment that we had, and also we're starting to move back some of those ESSER expenditures back to the general fund. We did have identify staffing reductions totaling 73 units for a decrease of $4.3 million. We do have a little bit of a contingency in case we have certain classrooms that come in or student growth more than we expected in certain areas, so we can handle those at the beginning of the year with staffing. Some of the other ones were minor. I am reflecting the property and casualty insurance increase of $1.2 million that we had this past year, and also the department budget reductions we're going through with a starting point of 2.5% on departmental budgets and reducing those. Some received a bigger decrease in that, but we started at 2.5%. Right now I have a contingency in here for inflation for some of our larger budgets, the maintenance department, and still going through that. So just contingency to cover anything that comes up. And then election costs, of course, this coming year we're having 2. We have an at-large election in May, and then the tax rate and bond election in November. So that is because we utilize Harris County and it's at-large. We pay a fee per voter in the registered voter in those in Harris County, and so we needed to bump that budget up as well to cover those costs. So taking a look at the preliminary budget for next year, this is what we're looking at. If the tax rate election passes for next year, this will be almost a $5 million surplus that we, as of today, that we're looking at in our preliminary budget. The risk that I talked about at the beginning of the presentation is if that tax rate election does not pass, and so you'll see that we're counting on that $17.4 million in revenue, but if that does not pass, then that bumps up our surplus. It moves it to a deficit of about $12.4 million. So it's a large swing when you're looking at that amount of money. And I wanted to really bring out the budget forecast for 3 years, so you could see if we just set aside the fact that right now we have no compensation adjustments in the budget that you're looking at in fiscal year 24. You have the $5 million surplus. you're still, next year, because we have the end of ESSER funds in fiscal year 25, so year 2, you're still going to see a $3 million deficit. It's not a large deficit, but it's still a deficit situation. And then that grows a little bit in fiscal year 26 as we start to see our expenditures stabilize. So going down to the bottom, this is where our risk is. Our risk, of course, the $12.4 million deficit if the tax rate fails. And also, if you think about it, as we're talking about compensations, plans and how much to add to compensation, any increases, remember that we have the funds assuming it passes, but if the tax rate fails, that adds on to the numbers that you're seeing. So if we were to spend $10 million on compensation increases, tax rate election fails, your $12.4 million is now $22.4 million. So it's just something to keep in mind as we go through these discussions. And the going out through the next 2 years in the forecast is where the deficits become quite larger. This slide has a lot of numbers, and I don't want to spend too much time on it at this point, but I wanted to give you a little bit of a breakdown for our debt service budget. So this budget is what funds our payments on our debt. This is going to change for a couple reasons, really, once we get an idea on our property value growth or a better handle on that in a couple weeks. The other thing that will impact this is our the state's change in that homestead exemption. So what I wanted to put together is just a look at if we do have an 8% value growth next year, this projection right here assumes that the board would stay at 27 cents over the next 3 years. It also assumes the passage of a $300 million bond issuance. So I just did a middle ground. It's we can do all different scenarios, but I did want to mention for fiscal year 23, we had budgeted a deficit of $1.8 million in that debt service fund. We don't believe we're going to have a deficit. I think we'll break even very closely. So our fund balance will stay intact there. We have a fund balance policy in this fund of 10%. So we want 10% of our debt service payments. The board has a goal to maintain that in that debt service. And so that, if you're looking at that, it projects a surplus in that fund. So looking over at fiscal year 24, if we were to utilizing our financial advisors' projections for debt service on a $300 million bond issuance, we would have at 27 cents, about a $225,000 surplus. Keeping that projection out to at 27 cents and going into the next 2 years, you'll see that there are some deficits going on, but the fund balance is there to allow that. I believe the financial advisors' projections that we have reflected going to 26 cents next year and then eventually going to 28 cents. So it's really how you structure the debt service payments. So it's just a first blush look at this. And like I said, once we get those final property value numbers, we can have a better idea of what we're looking at with that. That concludes the budget update. Are there any questions that I can answer?
Any questions?
Well, and so I know we're going to get right into it in the next couple of presentations, but on that debt service pro forma, this is just assuming we stay at the 27 cent INS tax rate. So what does a homestead exemption increase do to that? Assuming the 100,000 homestead exemption passes, which it looks like it will, is that basically applied against value growth? So we would just have a lower tax base to pull from with that 27 cents.
Yes, it lowers the taxable value, the overall taxable value. I was playing with some numbers, and I think it's about a 10%. So a penny would generate about 10% less is kind of my preliminary thoughts.
Okay.
So right now it's about 3.3 million. It'd probably be around 3 million.
So you could almost conceptualize it as if we're thinking we're going to have 8% value growth going into next year, it would instead be minus 2%.
It could, but the crazy
I
thing
know you
about-
can't do
yeah.
that on M&O,
Yeah.
but on INS,
Yeah, the crazy thing is when you look at the 12% value growth that you saw for
Mm-hmm.
2022, that's after that homestead exemption went from 15 to 40. So we still had over 12% value growth, even with that state homestead going up. So, but yes, it's based on the overall taxable value, and it will bring that down a little bit.
yeah.
And like I said, the state will hold us harmless for our current debt. So you'll see our state aid go up on the debt service side. Right now, we receive about $3 million in state aid. And the reason we receive that is because the state's bumped that homestead up from 15 to 40.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes. And so they hold us harmless on that, but it's really for any new debt that we issue. They don't hold us harmless on
That could end up being a big amount because I mean, if a $25,000 change yielded $3 million, then a $60,000 change is going to be a lot more. So that could change these numbers quite a bit.
Right.
But yeah, it just makes it that much more expensive on the rate side for the future that we take out.
Right. I think Paul and I were talking, it might be a couple pennies. Right now, our financial advisor projections that we have, that change could modify it by 1 or 2 pennies, what they were initially projecting.
Interesting.
The hold harmless provisions, they didn't bound those in any way, did they? It doesn't. There's not a time frame. It just says hold harmless provision. So it's just whatever existing debt, but not. Okay.
Right. It's existing debt, and then if you refund on existing debt, they'll
Back
include
out.
that too. So yes.
And then on I think it was on the last slide that you showed, it has assuming a $300 million bond issuance. Is that assuming we're doing it all in one single tranche, or is that?
It's at 3. It's $100 million every year for 3 years.
I see.
Yes.
So as kind of the payment structure in the years beyond 2026, it would just be the 17 million or so additional per year after that, or does it keep escalating even more?
There's a couple of structures set
to
out.
pull out the binder.
They basically our debt service on the $300 million kind of hits a high of about 21 million payments for the 2026 through 20. Well, yes, it
So
hits a
basically
high.
the year after the one that we have on our chart,
Yes.
and then it starts to kind of taper off after that.
Yes, because we're paying down.
Okay.
When you look at the overall debt service, what they're trying to do is get it to a point that's stable. And then about, 10 years from now, it'll drop. And I think we're making the assumption that we'll have to sell new debt there to fill in those gaps.
Right.
And it's also assuming a 20-year debt, 20-year limit on the bonds. So we want to have those paid off in 20 years.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Benzai. So the next item is discuss 2023-2024 district compensation plan.
Okay, so tonight we're going to take our first look. We have a presentation. There it is. First look at compensation. When we're talking about compensation, really I wanted to highlight some of the factors that go into this. The board priority is to administer competitive salaries, stipends, and benefits for all employees. Our budget risk, again, is that tax rate election failure. Legislative action is playing a big role here that I haven't seen in previous years. When the state increases the basic allotment, that's $6,160, under current law, any increase in that basic allotment, 30% of it has to be used on teacher, I think it's teacher, nurse, librarian compensation increases. So they started that a few years ago, and of course there was no increase to our basic allotment this year. However, there could be legislative action through a special session come September, October that may bump up that basic allotment. And so there's a lot of question on, well, if we were to do a compensation increase now before we know what the state's doing, and then the state does something, do we have to go give more of an increase, or would we apply what we're doing today towards those, towards that requirement? So just something to keep in mind. We also heard under the legislation from Special Session 2, where they may give a one-time adjustment of $2,000 to teachers. So there's so many things. It's so late in the game that it's just, I've never seen anything quite like this, but we don't have a lot of clarity, but that we're moving forward with what we need to do. Compensation options, really this is a discussion tonight, is just how much, you've seen the budget presentation, how much in compensation increases, what do they cost, and should we look at any contingencies, such as some districts will do a contingent salary increase that may be contingent on a successful tax rate election. Just things to consider. That's what some school districts have done. So a look back over the past 6 years, what have we done with our compensation and benefits? Last year we did a 2% increase with 3% for our non-exempt folks. Our teacher step increases, those teachers that are at that 5, 10, 15, 20, those benchmarks, really, if you look over the past 6 years, have received significant increases at those experience increments, 6 to 7 to 8% over the years. And there's about, I would estimate, about 20% of our teachers that fall into those incremental experience ranges. Looking back, you can see we usually stay between 2, 3.5%, 4%. Back in 2021, it was a 1% with a $500 retention payment. And then I've also provided our health insurance contribution increases. We've usually done a little bit each year. Last year was unique in that our rates actually went down due to some ESSER funds on the state level, so we didn't do any. And of course, this year we left our employer contribution as is. Always want to keep in mind about almost 3,200 of our employees, of our 5,300 employees, do carry health insurance through TRS Active Care, and for the most part, about 1,768 of our employees that have employee-only coverage will see an annual increase of about $444 in their annual premiums. This is if you look down, you'll see on the chart there's about 161 employees that will have an average increase of a little over $1,500. Those are the employees that may have family or spouse coverage, and there's certain areas and certain plans where those did go up significantly. Our employees will also see a retirement contribution increase this year to TRS of 0.25%. So if you think about a $60,000 a year teacher, that's about a $150 increase per year in their retirement. One of the things that we have done for many years is compare our salaries with 17 districts across the Houston area, some of the larger districts. And so on this slide, this is the results of our survey for this year. We don't strive to be the highest paying district. We want to stay right at the median, stay at that benchmark median, and we're, as you can see, green is good in this chart. It's all of the districts that we pay more than. If it's in red, those are districts that pay more than we do at these years of experience levels. What's interesting is you'll see in the 0 and 5 year categories you see a lot more red there. However, you can see how close we are. All the districts are just bumping up against each other. That 60,000 mark, 60,500 is, we're right there. And then 5 year, we're in the market median, the middle salary there, we're just off by 34. But you can see once we get into the 10, 15, and 20 year salaries, we are doing very well against our peers. In that 15 and 20 year range, we're at number 1. I think this is really a result of several years ago implementing our new salary structure for teachers, and that was one area we were really trying to fix was the pay at the experience levels, and that did make the impact there that you're seeing. If we hone in a little closer to CCISD and look at our neighboring school districts and see where we stand there, it's pretty much the same story. We're doing very well. We have a couple districts in our area that have very good salaries that are pretty out there from ours. Let's see, it's LaPorte and I believe Goose Creek and Deer Park, but for the most part, we are doing very well in our immediate area.
And just a quick question on that. You look at Goose Creek, LaPorte, and Deer Park, those are all heavy chemical plant districts. Is that just they have the revenue to sustain that, and so that's why they're able to do it?
Probably. They don't have as many staff as a larger district like us, and they may need that for recruitment purposes because of where they're at. Interesting, I believe LaPorte is looking at a tax rate election, but they did just approve I'm not sure what percent, but they are looking at doing a tax rate election there. So I'm not sure what the reasons are of why their compensation is so much higher.
Can you give us an idea of what percentage of our staff is it the 0 year versus 5, 10, 15, 20? Because the reason I ask, I get the impression that we have a lot more 0 year teachers than we have 20 year teachers. And I think if you factor that in, the dollar difference is even smaller than what you present here.
So I have to dig into my memory. I had those numbers, but I think if you were to look at our salary schedule, it's like a third or around 0 to 10. It's sort of a third and a third. Of course, we do have more teachers at the 0 to 5 than we do over 20. But I think it's 0 to 10, 10 to 20, and a split like that.
So about a third in each 10-year bracket, roughly?
I would venture to say I believe that's the case.
That's fine.
We can get that information and provide it Friday.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I always go look at what other school districts are doing with their compensation. And this year, I've been really interested in. I actually have a big chart where I'm doing what they've got for their salary, and then I also look at their budget presentations and see what are they going for a tax rate election? Are they approving a deficit budget? There's many districts that are approving very large deficit budgets and still approving general pay increases. It's very interesting. But this list, I would think under a normal year, I would be able to give you more examples of what districts are doing. And this was all I could come up with were these districts. So that's telling me that a lot of districts are waiting to see what's going to happen. So Cy-Fair approved a 3% increase. They have a very large deficit budget. Fort Bend, they had a failed tax rate election. They're doing a one-time supplemental payment through ESSER funds. Goose Creek is doing a one-time payment. Spring Branch has a very large deficit. They've approved, they're not approving a general pay increase. I think they were just doing the step increase. So small examples of what's going on, but seeing a lot of deficit budgets and some general pay increases along with it. So when we're looking at CCISD is what, we've had a lot of discussion and research, and we do a lot of surveys. We have some compensation needs that we do believe we need to have funding for next year to cover. The first is our teacher salary schedule. So if we were to do nothing and to give no increase at all, we need to maintain our current salary schedule. So we would still need to allow movement for our teachers that go from, for example, 4 to 5 years, there's a bump. So we would want to have that. And to maintain that is about $1 million each year. The other area that we have significant need in is in our auxiliary staff. So we have some large shortages in staffing in our custodial, child nutrition, transportation. And so we do have developed a plan that we'd like to put in place to start working on that compensation piece that will provide some market adjustments to certain areas and some equity adjustments for experience. So really to recognize the folks that we have with experience, to be able to hang on to them and not lose them to other jobs or other districts. We also did a stipend survey this year, a pretty comprehensive stipend survey, and we have fallen, actually, if we look just at the needs to get us to the median of where we needed to be, it's about $500,000 per year. We took that and said, okay, we don't have $500,000, but what can we do? And so we've identified about $165,000 in needs that we'd like to use. One of the big pieces of that is on our bilingual stipends, which are one of the areas that is difficult. It's difficult to find employees, and also in the area of athletics, athletic stipends. So, and then the final adjustment is that we feel like is important is on the special ed professional side. It's with our speech language pathologist. We have trouble, I believe right now we have maybe 5 vacancies with SLPs, and it's just a very competitive market with those staffing, and so we'd like to build in some funds to adjust that as well. So it's about $1.7 million that we feel like we need just to maintain and to try to address some of these areas where we're really having a hard time recruiting and retaining employees. So moving on, one of the things we're looking at is what our baseline is. If we give no increase at all, we know we need that $1.7 million to fund those items. If you think back to the budget that we looked at, it had a $5 million surplus with that tax rate, assuming the tax rate passes. So we are providing examples of what, if we did a 1% cost of living adjustment, a 1.5% cost of living adjustment brings us to about $5.6 million. Another option is doing a one-time supplement. So just the cost of a $500 supplement, that would be a payment that we're not committed to. We pay it this year, but it's not added to the next year's salary. It's just a one-time payment. That's also an option. So we're looking at all of these all of these things. One thing with the one-time supplements that some districts are doing is it's not eligible for TRS retirement purposes, so it's that's one downside of that. But really, we wanted kind of to get the feel from the board on, you know, in light of the budget, the risk that we have with the tax rate election failing, but also the needs of the district, the needs of our employees that are seeing increases in health insurance and all of that. What is really get input from the board to see where we want to, how we want to approach that.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
Could we make a decision on any of these things contingent on the bond election via TRE?
Yes, so you can do that, and the board, it would be through I believe there's a resolution that the board could pass. So, you know, at a minimum, the board might want to say we're, you know, doing nothing, but we'll pass this resolution. If a tax rate election passes, then you could approve an increase that would be retroactive back to the beginning of the contracts.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just my opinion on that. I don't like the idea, and I think it would be pretty bad from a messaging perspective to say we're holding your pay increase hostage if you don't pass this election for us. Like, I just think that's never the message we want to be sending. But I mean, the way I look at it is we need to charge what we need, or we need to increase to what we need to be competitive and meet our goals. And so if a 1% increase, or I mean, one thing we could also think about doing is, instead of doing a $500 one-time supplement, because I wasn't a big fan of the last time we did that either, the one-time supplement, because after it's over, it doesn't help you anymore. It doesn't keep you competitive. And like you said, it doesn't contribute to TRS. And there are some teachers who are probably in their last year, and they need that last increase in order to increase their payouts as they go into retirement. And so I think whatever we do should be what is needed to keep us competitive and meet our goals, and not be a one-time thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be a percentage increase. Maybe a $500 across the board increase to cover the additional expenses on the benefit side would maybe be a good approach. But I think we should do something permanent, because that's the only way you actually get any benefit from doing it at all. And I don't support trying to make it contingent on the outcome of an election. I think if we need it to stay competitive, then we need it whether that passes or not.
So I think last year, didn't we have the chart that showed what the surrounding districts were giving as far as compensation updates, and then also their budget and some of the assumptions that were being made, like deficits and things like that? Did we have one of those charts that showed that?
I had one that reflected the percentage increase that they gave. It didn't have their deficit or any of that, but yes.
Because I seem to remember, I think there was something that we looked at, and for me personally, it kind of gives some perspective when we're looking at this, and I think there were a lot of districts last year that were assuming a big deficit, but using some ESSER funds to make up for some of that as well. So I don't know, I would like to see something if we could kind of see what the area districts were doing, that also looked at what kind of budget assumptions they were making as well. So we kind of get an idea for what others are doing. So I don't know, I mean, at a minimum, the compensation needs have to be met. It's unfortunate we can't do more, but we'll figure it out.
Any other comments or questions? Yeah, this one.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, would a $500 across the board supplement be enough to cover most people's benefit changes? No, I'm trying to get
I
to that
think
point
it
in
would,
the-
if you look at most people that might have the minimum, the health insurance, 444, so it would, so they would basically, if they're carrying health insurance here, they would break even pretty much with an increase would be offset by any increase in their benefits.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm trying to get back to that slide. My computer
Oh,
involuntarily restarted right in the middle of your presentation. So
Yeah, it's,
I'm getting back there. But I mean, maybe that's the least we could do, is at least make sure that everybody isn't behind because of those changes. And then on top of that, it's just career ladder, 5-year progressions is kind of what we count on to incentivize staying with us.
I was going to ask Ms. Benzai about the Senate joint resolution that was on the previous slide deck that you showed, and it references providing school districts with funding in FY24 and FY25 for a supplemental payment to each full-time classroom teacher at $2,000 for districts over 20,000 students. When would we know if that were to pass, and how does that align with what we could consider? And then everybody who doesn't fall under a classroom teacher category, then what is that difference, and then what would that look like? Because I'm just thinking, if they're providing us with those funds, that may help, at least for those 2 years. Granted, that's not
right, so I haven't seen action on that piece of legislation, so I don't know if that will go anywhere or not. You know, the way it's worded, it's a supplement, so it's not added to their salary. It's just I don't know if it's a one-time payment or if it's something you add as a stipend for that year for those teachers. It also really doesn't use a librarian, a classroom teacher. You know, it's what is defined as a classroom teacher. So it's a very, when you look at the wording of it, it wasn't a real long passage. It was just, you know, so I don't know what will happen with that. You know, if you add in a $2,000 payment onto our salary schedule, that's really more than 3% in some cases. So it's I don't have an answer for you because I don't know if that will come to fruition, but you know,
I think everything that is in the school finance domain, like not like property taxes are getting dealt with, but when it comes to like the next special session in school finance, like any bill that's been introduced is just total vaporware until, just like what happened with property taxes, there's going to be some announcement that the speaker and the governor and the lieutenant governor and all these people have come to an agreement, and then then it'll sail through. But until then, I think everything is just kind of posturing. And just like it was with property taxes, you couldn't pick out, like, there were so many of those introduced that you couldn't pick out one and say that's what it's going to end, the final product is going to end up looking like. But if something like that did happen, a supplemental payment that kind of was state ordered and state paid for, I think we'd want to, I mean, that would be kind of extraneous to what we're talking about now, and we can't count on it. And I think we would also want to be pretty careful about messaging that as this is a one-time thing the state made us do. This is not an ongoing obligation, and it's not really part of the regular salary schedule either. So I don't know. I think we just kind of, until the state passes something, we just kind of do our thing.
that's, I think, what we've come to the conclusion of. We have to forge ahead with our decisions because we can't guess or wait on some of the, it's getting very late in the game, so.
Just, I guess, follow-up too is the $500 supplement recommendation versus a 1%. There's not much difference. They're both about 4.3 million. do we have a sense of what the teachers feel they would prefer, or what they would like? If they had a choice.
I would think they would want the commitment on their salary, the
The salary.
percentage increase
Okay,
one,
good to
because
know.
it's a one-time payment is not, doesn't go towards their highest years for
Mhm.
retirement.
Mhm.
And also it's good again the following year. So that's a good thing for the employees, but that's, on the other hand, it's a risk for us because if our tax rate election fails, we're committed to those funds. So, if the 1.5%, I feel comfortable. It's not it's not a 4% increase. So it's a reasonable amount dollar-wise that, it's not as much risk we're taking.
Yeah.
As opposed to a 3 or 4% increase.
But I think knowing, what our faculty and what our staff would prefer if given, us, we're just looking at the budget, right? But you take it beyond that to understand what is more important. And from the faculty standpoint, we constantly are having conversations about retention and, we want to make sure we address their needs. So, if we have two options that are financially basically the same, and our faculty is saying we would rather this versus this, I think we need to listen to them. So I think that is important. And I doubt there's a survey that's gone out or anything like that, but I know we have a lot of former teachers in this room, so they can offer that perspective. So, but I do think it's important to keep that in mind, what they would like.
Financially, it makes more sense for them to get the 1% increase. You're making a financial decision for somebody at that point.
Right.
I don't know that surveying them, it's complex. But with compounding, the 1% is always going to be more attractive.
Right. Well, it's really about the distribution, right? So if you do 1%, then an employee who's making $60,000 gets $600. An employee who's making $30,000 gets $300. And so that employee at the lower end loses out because their benefits went up a flat amount. And so they're coming out behind compared to last year. Whereas if you do 500 across the board, yeah, it's not quite as much for the employee who's making 60,000, but it's a lot more for the employee who's making 30,000. And so really that's just kind of a values check on which employees we maybe think need the most additional benefit right now. And I don't know. We are doing the market adjustments for some auxiliary employees, but I still worry about paraprofessionals, about like administrative assistants. That's a 1% increase doesn't do a lot for them, and they don't have the every 5 years growth that teachers have. So just looking at it from that perspective, I could see a flat and across the board increase doing a lot more good without really affecting the teacher salary schedule that much.
It's not a bad idea, but not a supplement.
Right. A salary increase like that would carry forward, but a flat amount for all employees instead of a percentage for all employees.
Yeah, because you're right, that would help the paras and the secretaries more than.
And one of the things we've done in the past, if you look at our previous years, is we have provided a higher percentage to our auxiliary and paraprofessionals. And it doesn't, it's not a significant overall cost. It's a cost increase, but it's because there's not as many folks,
Right.
There's obviously more teachers. So that is something we've actually been looking at and running the numbers on, doing a higher percentage for those para and auxiliary than a different amount for everyone else.
And historically on slide 3, there's some evidence of that. So we could run some numbers on that. What it might be for like a 1.5 versus a 2% or
Right.
1 to 2.
So would you like to see numbers on like just a flat
Absolutely.
amount?
Yeah, I agree with where Scott's going with this, that
Yeah.
I think proportionally, that's where it's needed more, to be honest. And so I'd like to see that addressed.
But not affecting the step, Right, that's separate.
Well, yeah, I guess all the steps would also go up by that amount. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be in favor of looking at, like you said, an increased percentage on that side of it,
Right.
plus the 1%, or an across-the-board adjustment that would do the same thing in essence.
And I guess the advantage of an across-the-board adjustment, knowing that we have so many unknowns around what our budget's going to be and whether the tax increase passes. I mean, it still sends a message of trying to do something, but it also doesn't put us in a position that extends beyond what we think we could reasonably sustain in the out years. Still an adjustment, but I just wonder if it's something we.
Well, we're making the commitment at that point,
yeah.
and I agree with you. We don't want to word it, but if that's our budget assumption, it is what it is at that point. I mean, if it doesn't pass, we've already committed. So I think that shows a commitment on our part that we're going to pay for it one way or another.
Yeah, and I just never want to approach it with the mentality of if we get all this extra revenue, we can start giving out more money. Like it is, we give out what we need to give out in order to meet our employees' needs and stay competitive, and then we tax what is needed to cover that. And so like we do one first and then we do the other. It's not that we have all this extra tax revenue, so let's start increasing salaries. I think that's how you end up like some of these other districts, and then a deficit can sneak up on you. So I like the approach we're going with, and I always just want to keep our mentality focused on meeting needs and not using all the dollars we have.
Any other? Okay, I think we're good. We'll move to the next item around community input and communications plan for 2023. Can you say Vitari, or is that, have I done my making that up?
Yes.
I thought I heard somebody said that, and then I wasn't sure how the acronym was pronounced in the proposal.
Yeah, so Ms. Polson will join us after the board approval in June. Ms. Polson and the communications department began work the following day to look at community input and communications plan for proposed, and I'll call it a voter-approved tax rate election and bond proposal. And so she'll share an overview of the plan, which will launch later this week.
Great, thank you. So following our school board meeting, as Dr. Engel said, we began developing the communication materials to start educating the public on certainly the financial challenges that we're facing and the need for a tax rate election, but also the good work of the Facility Advisory Committee, their full package, and then the 3 options that the board approved for us to take out for public input. I do want to say this really is only the public feedback phase. So it's important that once we move into election season, there'll be far more activity that will be happening. This is in the middle of July, so we're trying to see how we can access as many people as possible. So on Wednesday, we will switch over our homepage of our website to on the homepage to talk about the power of pennies. That's sort of our informational campaign message about the power of those golden pennies on the tax rate election, as well as the power of the pennies up to 7, potentially higher depending on whatever we work through on this homestead exemption, the impact it might have on the INS side. And then this is a look at what we have, a standalone website that will launch alongside this on Wednesday. And this will eventually evolve into the election site, depending on what the board ultimately calls an election order. And so the challenge is really having the taxpayers understand the difference between a maintenance and operations tax rate, the interest and sinking, and the different influences on both of those. Certainly on the maintenance and operations, we don't benefit from property value increases, but we do on the INS side. And that is very difficult to do in written form. It is very, very challenging. We have a great communications team, and Paul Miller and Alice Benzai have been with us in developing this content. And it has lots of graphs that you have seen before. that will be able to tell our story in images. I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to explore our new adult learning platform that we've titled University. So we've had some online courses that have been launched about school safety, parent assistance center work, but we've also created a online course that Alice Benzai did. She did a great job really breaking down school funding basics. And so people can enroll in it, they complete it, they get a certificate upon completion. The good thing about this is that we can really encourage our staff members and everybody to go through it, because they will be key to this messaging, because they will go ask their neighbors who are potentially a teacher or an administrator, and they need to be able to explain it. And I hope all of you will take it too, but those in the community that take it will have access to who took it, so we can reach out to them to have them help us tell the story, so they become more ambassadors throughout this process. Because once we move into election season, we're very limited, staff is limited on what we can and can't share. School board members can do whatever, can influence and do that, but our call to action really has to be measured at that point. I was going to show you a video, but I know for time. And then this is kind of what the 3 options would look like online. We also have video tours of Armand Bayou, Green Elementary, Clear Lake Intermediate, to showcase sort of the needs at those particular campuses for aging facilities. And you see option 1, option 2, option 3. On the website, people will be able to cast their favorite. So we'll be able to collect qualitative feedback from the community. And I won't show the video. No, I'll show you that. And then this is just a snapshot of some social media activity that we're planning to do to really raise the red flag on the maintenance and operations, the general fund side of the district. So here's kind of our next steps. We do have community meetings beginning July 18th. We start at Clear Springs High School. We move on to Clearbrook, Clear Lake High School, Clear Creek, Clear Falls High School, and then a virtual session on August 3rd. And then the phone survey begins July 23rd through the 30th. And I should have the first draft of those questions tomorrow from the phone survey company. So we had a meeting late last week to get them started. And that is a random sampling phone survey of registered voters who voted in the last November election. And they will have live interviewers call until they get to 400, and to make sure those 400 are geographically represented, demographically represented. So it takes time for them to get that. And it has become increasingly challenging to get people to, first of all, there's not that many landlines anymore, but they do have access to cell phone numbers, but just to get people to agree to do the survey. I will say in 2017, when we did this, the final election results were 3 points higher than what the phone survey came out with. So that we've done this now twice. This will be our 3rd time. We have high confidence in that data that will be coming back to the board. And then we'll share all of this back with you during our work session on August 5th. So that's kind of our plan for this between now and August 5th.
Any questions?
Yeah, so on the website, you're gonna have them vote on those 3 options?
Mm-hmm.
What about on the phone survey?
So on the phone survey, what will happen, yes, they're going to test all 3 options on the phone survey.
Because my fear there is if there's not a 4th option, that I won't vote for a bond. All we're getting is which one of those 3 proposals they might be willing to support.
Right. The phone survey will be different than the online survey, because the phone survey begins with you're an uninformed voter. So they ask you very initial questions. Would you support a bond proposal? Like we tested a couple in the last one, 487, 350. And then as they became informed down the road, you began to see what they liked. And then that helps inform the final result. Because what you don't want to do is put something on the bond proposition that is not attractive to any of them. So it really will look very different to this. Is just really qualitative which one that they prefer of those 3 options. This one will tell you, they'll test elements of it. They're going to test aging schools, they're going to test technology, they'll test musical instruments and all of those things that vary in those things, as well as the tax rate implications, which will be a very, very rough estimate considering what's happening.
Because I remember it was very late, that meeting, and what one of the concerns is exactly this, is that you have three options. Well, the fourth option is I wouldn't vote for a bond, right? So my question is if we do this for a while and kind of get an idea of where people are at, then we could take it on the phone survey and say, this is it, and it's yes or no at that point. That's my only, because if you're only giving them three options, and they wouldn't necessarily vote for a bond, but you're only giving them three options, and they'll say, well, I'll take this lowest one, and then we go and present it.
No, they still don't vote.
Really, what they were saying is I'm voting for the least amount because my option was zero. So that's my big fear there, is that the data gets a little skewed if that's how it's presented.
So I'll give you a good example. In 2017, we tested 499 million in school bonds, which would projected to increase property taxes by $7. And then we did 350, and therefore would not increase property taxes. So we tested a no tax rate increase.
So it was similar.
It was similar, and certainly the no tax rate was higher.
Okay.
Naturally, and then the higher amount was less. But as they became an informed voter, and you begin to see what they favor, what they don't favor, at the end of the day, the 499 million, which was the highest one, was at 58%.
Okay.
And yeah, so that was the idea, to test where people are, and that really is. I think the goal of this is to see what's the taxing capacity of our homeowners.
Yeah.
But if you'd like, we could wait a little bit longer. I just don't know that we're going to have that.
It sounds like you've done this before, so I mean, if we're comfortable.
Well, I haven't done putting off 3 proposals and a tax rate election on one phone survey, so but they're really good at what they do.
Yeah. So I guess as we go down, if I'm one of the people surveyed and I pick up the phone, the first question is going to be the tax ratification election, and then it'll go, do you agree with I can't even remember these numbers, the 200 million, 394, like those are each separate yes or no questions,
Yes.
right?
So when I spoke with
And does it accelerate, like get higher each one, or does it come down?
it's all random, so that the questions kind of randomized throughout this. So sometimes they'll be asking the 499 first, or the bond first, and then go to the tax rate election. So the way they do their process, it's not necessarily every question is in the same order. What they recommended to us is to focus more on the bond proposals, because you're going for a tax rate election no matter what. So that's the value of these community meetings, is to educate them on that absolute need. What's valuable about this is that they can test the different packages.
And if they randomize it, maybe that gives us a sense of we should only go for the tax rate election, depending on the data comes back.
Correct.
Any other questions or comments?
I'm curious, what's the pulse right now of our facility advisory leaders? Are they still all in, or what?
We had such a great meeting with them on Tuesday evening, and they were kind of working with blinders because they didn't see that part of it. And they were in full support of the tax rate election. And yet they're still very passionate about the work that they've done. And so we did a private poll. We sent them a link. They didn't have to raise their hand. Given all things considered, what would you support? And the majority of them still would like to see the full bond package.
Knowing what they know about our tax rate election as well.
Oh, and all of them supportive of the tax rate election.
Okay.
And several of them reached out following to see what they can do to help.
Yeah, if I was reading the numbers on that right, it was about 17 of them answered, and I think 11 wanted to do the full amount, and then 6 or 7 wanted to do the smaller, like one of the smaller proposals. But
I think what they wanted was some assurance that the work was going to get done sometime, too. That it wasn't not going to get done.
Can you look back into the history of any of the past bonds that possibly were split, and what were the results of that? I can't remember as a voter or taxpayer if or ever when there was a recommendation for, a significant bond that may have been split and then went out to vote as a split, right? And if it passed or not.
What do you mean by split?
Yeah.
Well, like this one, $600 million, and the recommendation, one of the recommendations is option 1 now and option 2 later. So you're splitting the $600 million.
Right, we have.
Has that ever been done before?
No. And you would see a lot more propositions now based on the legislation as well. But I think once you get to that point, you're really going out for one.
Right. I mean, that would be the hope. That is the plan, that you're going to receive all this feedback and decide what package we're going to take out. So there'll only be one package.
But
that could be broken into
Both broken on different compositions.
and you had made the comment about the committee, the advisory committee just really wants to make sure that that it's going to get done. And so with some of the recommendations and conversation was 300 million now, 300 million later, in different hybrid ways. So that's why I was curious if it had ever been done before, split like that, and if there were ever.
It's
Is there
important when
risk?
we go out to these community meetings that we celebrate the work of the group and that you fully accepted the recommendation. Now we're just trying to get their feedback on the timing. And so that it's not really that they're picking option 1 over option 2, option 3. They're picking option 1 today, and 2 and 3 may come down at a later date. So that's really important for us to keep saying, is that we're not saying these 2 options that don't come forward.
But the recommendation is still all in.
Right.
Well, okay, to be clear though, and this is why we went to such great pains at the last meeting to clarify this, what we voted on was acknowledging receipt of the work of the committee. We did not vote to say, we agree with everything in here, or we are committing to do everything in here. So, like, we acknowledged that the committee prepared a report for us, I think it's pretty clear by now that there was not consensus on the committee. Maybe a majority of the committee supported it, but it was nothing close to unanimous. And now we have received a report, and we are deciding what we want to take from it out to voters. And so I don't think it's accurate to go out there and say the board has agreed that we are doing all of these projects. And that's why we went to a lot of effort at the last meeting. And we had our unanimous vote to make sure that it was clear what we were voting on then.
I agree. There is some potential risk on that too, is that you throw out 3 options and you move forward with option 1 and option 2 and 3, and people had invested, they wanted those projects, and then it's just, there's a risk and reward in both on that communication. But yes, I agree.
Yeah, and I think as we've gone through this and talked about it, like you said, the board and the committee's work, we do want, it's so important to validate, but then now what we're seeking is what our community is comfortable with. How much of that committee's work is the community willing to move forward with? And the board always has the option to make changes as we go through. It's always a final board decision at that point.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I do want to just make sure that what you're saying, Ms. Rowan, is really what we intend. Is we accepted the committee's recommendation, the full recommendation, and then the decision was to provide complete transparency back to the community to provide input on what they believe, how they feel about the options, but we've not endorsed or supported one option over another. But I think I think it is. I think that's what you were saying. I just want to make sure. And so now we ultimately, because it really wasn't at the stage that we're at this point to make that decision yet. We're waiting to make that decision once we get a pulse from the community, once we get feedback, before we make a final decision as a board on what set of proposition goes out for the bond. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. I just want to. what I don't want us saying is we have committed to every project that was in that report, doing it at some point.
We haven't done that until we vote on it.
Right. And so that is not what we voted on
Correct.
at the last meeting.
We voted on to give the authority to the superintendent
To go
and
out
get
for
feedback.
input. Right. Yes.
That's all the options. Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
We're essentially, the committee would have been doing this process, getting community feedback, but we now moved it to us doing it because of the tax rate election.
Mhm.
So we're really, it's the same process, it's just a different package.
And did you say that the phone calls happen in parallel with the meetings at the campuses, or does it happen before that? I missed the.
It's in the middle of it. It's July 23rd through July 30th, and the meeting.
Oh, I see it there. Okay.
July 18th through August 3rd.
Okay. And will people who attend the sessions automatically get included to provide us that feedback?
Yes, so just as they can do, they'll take the same poll that's on the website. So there'll be a QR code where they can give us immediate feedback on how they feel about
That
it.
will show during the meeting?
Mhm.
Okay.
And are you gonna put this out to staff?
So what is the format of these public meetings? I mean, is it kind of like I know when we've done open feedback in other committees, it's kind of almost been like open mic, anyone can come tell the committee what they think. I mean, is that going to be the format here too?
Very much so.
Town hall.
So it would be, just because of the way things have evolved, it will be very similar to what was presented to you, to the board, where Paul Miller and Alice Benzai do their sections of it. And then we're gonna have them all in the auditorium, so the acoustics, I think, will be better than in the commons. We believe that'll be better. And then we'll have 2 microphones where individuals can come up and ask a question. They can leave comment cards. We'll begin promoting it later this week through phone calls, emails, media alerts, social media.
So you said comment cards. They can't just come in and tell us what they think?
No, they can. There's
Okay.
there'll be 2 microphones.
Okay.
Absolutely, but some people prefer just to
Okay.
leave a comment card. But it's not gonna be one way, is what I'm saying, is that we want that engagement, that feedback.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Before we leave, I just wanted to make an observation here. You got a chart here that shows some of the social media campaign, and I wanted to commend you for the sample chart that you picked, the one that showed their current basic allotment is 6160, and we really need something closer to 7207 to keep up with inflation. I think that's kind of crucial. That may be one of the most important charts that I've seen today. I know most of the board members, I know I certainly have engaged with our elected representatives to try to drive this point home, and I don't know that it's been sinking in. Has the district presented that particular set of numbers to anyone in Austin?
The inflation slide, yes, we have.
Yes.
Okay,
Uh-huh.
great.
Yes, we have.
I think that's good job.
And that was actually a TEA recommended number, wasn't it?
TASPA.
Yes,
It was?
Yes, right.
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
And the last item on the agenda is the Texas House Bill 3 update.
Okay, yes, so Mr. Palazzi is going to join us. He and Mr. Miller will provide an update on the district's implementation of House Bill 3, signed by the governor on June 14th. And they've been working with Captain Campbell on implementation plans and received input from the School Safety and Security Committee a few weeks ago. We really value this committee's input. These are experts in the field, and they have provided some feedback too on our proposal. So,
Thank you, Dr. Engel. Good evening.
yeah.
We had our most recent safety committee meeting on June 28th, and I wanted to give the board, I wanted to be as transparent as we can be and provide the board with all the information that was discussed at the safety committee meeting as it relates to House Bill 3. Again, In CCISD, we always believe everyone deserves to be physically and emotionally safe. It's one of our paramount beliefs. And our strategy is we will always foster a safe and nurturing environment. One of the big resources for that is this School Safety and Security Committee that was implemented back in 2018. So just a quick summary. I know some of you have seen this before of House Bill 3. Some of the aspects that are being discussed in House Bill 3 is making sure the district has safe facility constructions, which we do when we meet the requirements of that bill. School safety and support, what that is, for lack of a better description, is if school districts aren't doing what they should do, there's a new support team that will help them to complete all the aspects that, the different procedures and meetings and trainings that they need to do. There's a mental health training for all staff members that work with students. There's going to be a sharing of discipline and threat assessment records among districts. So if a student has some sort of discipline or has some sort of assistance they need regarding a threat assessment, that information will be shared with other districts and shared with us should they be coming to us. I know there's a lot of talk about armed security officers. I bolded that. We'll discuss that in a little bit. There's also a requirement of floor plans and walkthroughs with local law enforcement and law enforcement that you have in your school district. We're well on our way with that. And then firearm storages. This is going to be provided by information provided by the district, by the state, to us to be disseminated to our families. Just information on firearm storage and safety regarding that. So in a brief, quick summary, each one goes into a little bit more detail, but that was just a general overview of what House Bill 3 entails. Our safety team the other day was sitting down, we were discussing just some of the things that have been implemented in our district. And we sat down and we thought about the amount of planning, the amount of design, work, projects, implementation with regard to safety improvements that has gone into our district in the last 5 years, since 2018. And it's pretty amazing to think that we sat down, we started writing things down, and just the amount of time to get everyone together to plan and then to actually construct those and implement that, it's really great. And you see the concerted effort by every level of our school district. Exterior, we put up fencing, we've window, shatterproof and impact resistant window film, exterior door checks, limited access points, interior, the secure vestibules that has been commented by the state. Our entrances to schools has changed drastically. Our controlled access points, our door alarms that we implemented last year, our camera systems, we have many cameras in our school district, interior and exterior, and the panic button and the access buttons. Everyone in our school district, in every room, has the ability to contact emergency personnel one touch. You do not have to dial 9 to get out, 911, 281, whatever it is. And in 2018, that became a mandate after the state kind of saw some of the things that we were doing. And then support, which sometimes gets overlooked. Our counselors, our student support counselors, our social workers, our at-risk personnel, our homeless personnel. They're not homeless, but they work with our homeless students. And then our SSSP, which was a new group that was established last year. It was renamed. It's our threat assessment teams. And every one of our schools has one. It stands for Supportive School Program, Safe and Supportive School Programs. Just on that alone has been a tremendous input. And that, you have to hire people, a lot of these. You have to, jump in, feet first, and say, this is what we deem to be important. And it hasn't always been just facility improvements. It's been people, policies, trainings, procedures, which I think has gone a long way. And above it all, I put up there, our law enforcement is supportive in every one of those areas. They're involved in every one of those areas. And I didn't want to just put them in one because exterior, interior, the support that they provide, and I've spoken many times about the interpersonal relationships that have been established, which sometimes might be the only relationship some of our students have. So I just wanted to just throw out there what our district has been able to do in 5 short years. let's go back to the armed security. What I want to show you here, and I know it's small, and I'll be able to provide it to you later. These are our elementary schools. This is the mileage of an armed security officer to every one of our elementary school campuses. And I've included multiple, because it's not just one. Every one of our elementary schools, obviously, you know, every one of our intermediate schools has an SLO officer, and every one of the high schools has 3, not to mention the local law enforcement that can help. But our elementary schools has our SLOs, has local law enforcement, has constables. And I wanted to provide that information to you and show you. And Mr. Bowen, I updated Weber. The constable is 1.5. Miles, I was concerned a little bit on Weber. Mr. Bowen said, we don't have anything closer than 2.5 miles. And I said, well, our constables are always there. And the closest constable. So every one of our, we have a presence at every one of our elementary schools throughout the day. We are fully staffed with all of our SLOs, and there's our standard with our high schools, deputies, and elementary schools. And again, as you know, that elementary coverage has changed drastically in the last year with the personnel we've been able to add. The state also says that you can implement a school marshal or guardian program. They give the school districts that authority. School marshal program, they've stated that they're there to prevent the act of murder or serious bodily injury on school premises. They are an armed employee. They require 80 hours of school marshal training. And as of April of this year, 74 school districts out of 1,200 have a school marshal program. It's 361 people in the entire state of Texas. The Guardian program, similar, little different. They both are there to do the same things. The Guardian program says they're there to protect students and staff against an active shooter. They require somewhere 16 to 20 hours of initial training. So a little bit less than the Marshall program. And as of 2020, there wasn't as much updated information. There was 304 districts that use a school marshal program. And just to be clear, with a lot of the research I was doing, many of them were rural districts, small districts, one school districts, and we cover the range of East Texas, West Texas, the Panhandle. It was the commonality between they were all rural districts. I looked into it. I know you wanted to know that information. Big difference between the school marshal and guardian program is the school marshal program has to be followed to a T by Texas law enforcement. The guardian program, the board can kind of plan out some trainings and how they want to implement it differently. So that's the big difference. We spoke about everything at our safety committee meeting. We met for a while, had a very good meeting, and discussed the safety components of our systems of our safety. And the safety committee does not recommend the implementation of either the school marshal or guardian program. So, in summary, looking at everything that CCISD has invested in, people, I'll say what Dr. Ingles, people, policy, and promise, the amount of time, energy, effort, and finances we've invested, based upon the commitment and implementation of safety systems and current law enforcement coverage, the School Safety and Security Committee is confident the district provides a safe learning environment. The committee also believes that our current law enforcement coverage meets the requirements of House Bill 3. So, this is what we talked about, this is what we spoke about at great length. Not trying to hide anything, wanted to be transparent and give all of the board the information of the safety committee meeting that sometimes we don't get to do. And Dr. Engel, Paul, Mr. Miller thought it was really important to make sure everyone was aware. And the safety committee was adamant that they were in support of speaking to the whole board regarding this. They were very confident and proud of the work that they've done. So I will. Are there any questions?
I have a question. So,
Yes.
my name's
We don't,
Laura Valdez.
excuse me, ma'am, we don't accept questions from the public. There's time for community input
Can I
at the
leave it?
beginning.
Because I'm a paid taxpayer for 25 years.
You could absolutely leave a note. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Any questions or comments from the board?
Yeah, I guess I'm, maybe I had a misunderstanding with regard to what House Bill 3 requires. And, I was looking at this and I see that some of these police departments are literally adjacent to our campuses. And it just strikes me that my understanding of this was that you had to have somebody on campus. And it just strikes me that if the police department is next door, that's kind of gilding the lily. What is the actual requirement, and on what basis do you think that would need it?
So House Bill 3 states that the district has to have a police officer present during the day, during the school hours on a campus. They don't state all day. They don't state 8 hours a day. They state it has to be present during the school day, during the school hours.
And I think as a follow-up to that, there have been versions that, Layla and I were talking through some of that, there have been versions that did stipulate, and what ended up being passed did not stipulate. So some conversations with some of the TEA and school safety people, it's generally are open to interpretation, and ultimately we do have daily presence on every campus during the day, it's during the school day. As a matter of fact, it's half day, one half day, and so it's basically sharing 2 elementary schools. So that's taken as a whole, that's what the committee ultimately believed.
And I know some information, I don't want to say different, but maybe not as clear information that was out there. What ultimately was passed was the president.
So if I could just regurgitate that and make sure I got it straight. At one point in the deliberations on the bill, there was a version of it presented that spelled out that you had to have 8 hours on campus, and that was deliberately pulled out of the language we had.
That does not say.
I think that's accurate. I mean, it doesn't mean that the state couldn't come in and provide further guidance and ultimately change that, but as it is right now, that's what our interpretation is.
I'm not asking that any of us ask the Attorney General at this point. If we think we're good, and it looks like we are, and I'm satisfied.
Mr. Moore?
Well, yeah, just to kind of hone in on that, TEA has the ability, if they feel differently about that, they have the ability to issue guidance to school districts clarifying these requirements, right? And they have not done so.
That is correct.
Did you mention whether there was still funding associated with this requirement? Did that come through? At one point, there was a small amount of funding that was included.
That is correct. There is a small amount that we could use for security officers if we needed to. We could put to the mental health training. Any other aspect of the House Bill 3. It's a small amount. You get
It's 15,000
per campus.
per campus in the district, but the funds that we're expending now for officers on all the campuses, well exceeds.
Overall, we're spending about $6.5 million on security across the district, and so the state provides $1 million, a little over $1 million with that extra 15,000 per campus that they'll provide.
But we can still receive that and apply it towards.
Yes, sir.
And there will be some additional mental health training required.
Any other questions or comments?
No, I think the committee, Scott and I were on the committee, and we were quick to say we're not going to harm teachers. That seems to be from the previous board meeting the big concern, and that was taken off the table immediately, and we really did have a good meeting to talk through it.
Yeah, I do think one item that I am still kind of interested in from that is I would like to know, and maybe we don't even have this information, but you probably do somewhere in the old databases. I mean, how many staff members do we have, faculty, teachers, staff, who even have any kind of law enforcement or military background that would potentially be applicable to something like that? I mean, I'm just kind of curious to know what the number is of staff members we have who even, I guess, could somewhat comfortably meet that requirement. Because I know it's going to be low, but I am kind of curious to know what the number is.
We're not asking that on our application, so it's not something we could query. We could actually go back in and look at their prior experience. We haven't put the data together. But we'd have to go and look at each individual teacher's resume and background that they've listed in their application, but we haven't set it up to where it can be queried for that item.
For prior law enforcement, prior military. Okay.
And with that, that's very useful information. With that, they would still have to go through both of those programs because a lot of the part of the program, the Marshal and the Guardian, is school-based, and there's a training session on school-based law enforcement as opposed to regular law enforcement. So, but obviously they have a significant background in law enforcement.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Oh, I'd like just to thank everyone who presented, Ms. Benzai, Ms. Polson, Mr. Palazzi. Thank you all for preparing for today's workshop, especially following a holiday week and with lots going on following our last board meeting. I'd also just like to say welcome to Dr. Stallings. So thank you for being here. You picked a shorter meeting than the board meeting, but we'll have more of those, I'm sure. So welcome. We're glad to have you on board. And with no further business before the board, I'll adjourn this at 6:48.